it's been a few months and I have done nothing but fail. And here's the thing about sourdough bread. If you talk to anybody about it and if you start researching them about it, it's like Alice in Wonderland. You go down a rabbit hole of information. There is, in my days, the old people say when I was young, more than you can shake a stick at as far as how much information is out there. And here's the thing, in my sourdough bread journey of making it, I learned how many, not exactly how many terms there are, but quite a few terms. And it's extremely confusing. Sourdough bread includes what's called a starter. So if you ever talk to someone about sourdough bread, one day my wife and I went to one of our local restaurants in town and we had a waitress helping us. And I mentioned something to her about sourdough bread and she said, "Oh, I have a starter if you like." The funny part was that I don't want to say she wasn't the like cleanliest server or anything like that, but when she offered us a starter, it was to me basically. My wife and I, after she left, we both kind of looked at each other and said, I don't know. Now I have friends and family members. Most notably, I have an older sister. All of my sisters are older than me, but this one has been making sourdough bread for over 4 years, and she's really good at it. As a matter of fact, when I saw all 5 of my living sisters this past month or so, she bought a bunch of loaves of bread, and I happened to bring one home, and everyone in my family loved it. So I decided after that I wanted to learn to make sourdough bread. She gave me a starter, her own starter, and that starter was 9 years old. The thing about a starter is it can live as long as you want. Here's an example. There's probably about 20 grams, more or less, give or take, of starter in here. And this is old. This is like 9 years old. This is all that I have of what she gave me. And she probably gave me maybe 150 grams of starter, which is quite a bit. It's over a quarter cup. But the thing about a starter is you only need a little bit to make a loaf of bread. And I was telling you guys about all of the terms. The first thing you ever hear people talking about when they make sourdough bread is a starter. So my sister gave me a starter. Then I started watching all kinds of sourdough bread videos. And if you go to YouTube or any other social media page, you're going to find, I would like to say, millions of people that make sourdough bread. And they have their recipe. And then you have formulas, you have bakers, non-bakers, housewives, house husbands, just people trying to make bread. But when it comes to sourdough bread, the starter is supposed to be the most important part. As your starter goes, so goes your bread. Well, guess what? Even though I had a really good starter, I messed up every loaf of bread that I made. They were flat, heavy, gooey. They never rose up like the really pretty breads that you see on any social media. For example, they raise up and they're round like this, rounded like a dome, right? Mine were flat like a pancake or a pan even. They never rose, and they still tasted good, but they weren't right. So I thought to myself after buying 4 bags of King Arthur bread flour, which is a little more expensive than your regular flour. Reason why, it's got a higher level of protein than your normal all-purpose flour. So, and it's a bread flour, so it's more expensive. Now going back to the instructions, I tried everything by, first I listened to my sister, but she told me all the instructions so fast, I didn't write them down. She didn't want to write them down. When I talked to her about some of the terms that I used, she was a little short and quick with me and said, just listen to what I say and write it down. And I was like, oh, I can't listen and write it down because I'm trying to hold the camera and listen to you. So anyways, I learned of all kinds of different terms for the process of bread making. For example, one of the things they'll tell you to do with your starter before you even put it in your dough is to make an auto lease. And I'm like, What the heck is an auto lease? Is that when I go to a car dealership and lease a car? No, an auto lease is a resting period. It's you make flour and water. That's all you need for sourdough bread. Flour, water, and salt. That's it. It makes its own yeast. I can't even explain how. But they tell you to start off with an auto lease. Then you put in a certain amount of flour, the same amount. It's called a ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you put 100 grams of flour in, you put 100 grams of water. You mix it up, and which is called hydrating, another term, right? And then you let it rest. And that's the thing about sourdough bread. It can take you days, weeks, months to make. Just it can take that long just to make your starter, let alone the bread. And it's like, you know what? I give up. I'm gonna go to the store and buy a loaf of sourdough bread. But when you get the sourdough bread, it's not as good as homemade. You know why? All of the products we buy that are packaged in the store, they're not natural. Nothing's natural when you buy something that's packaged. It's mass produced, and what do? They put preservatives and additives in it. It's not the same as homemade. That's why if you eat something homemade and whole, it's always better than stuff that's not. So I found out about the starter. Then I found out about, after the auto lease, I found out about a levain. And I'm like, oh, what is a levain? A levain is a small mixture, and you take your starter and you add it to the auto lease. So I'm like, well, what do I do? Because I was telling my sister, well, I used a starter and I put it in the flour. I didn't know that I missed one of the steps in making the bread that I was told by the pros and by all kinds of amateurs, maybe intermediates or experts that I found online. Even when I went to websites such as King Arthur, they have a website. And if you go on any bread flour website, they're going to give you recipes, right? And then you can even buy a starter from them. Or I heard a guy tonight who's a professional bread maker said, yeah, you can go to a bread shop. They'll give you a starter probably for free because they like helping people. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. So anyways, I learned about the starter. Then I learned about the auto lease. Then I learned about the levain. And I'm like, what's a levain? And another thing about the bread, you have terms that are in French or other languages. And I'm like, oh my gosh. For example, this is a razor, right? A straight razor, a blade, razor blade. But you put it in a handle like this, and now you call it a lame. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just a razor. That's why they tell you when you make the bread, you can just use a sharp knife or scissors. So back to the dough. I got the starter. I did my auto lease. Then I saw the levain. I said, oh no, I did something wrong because I didn't do that in that manner. So I'm going, oh, what did I do wrong? Well, what I did was I used the starter, and I went straight to what they call bulk fermentation. Now, when I heard that term for the first time, I'm like, what is bulk fermentation? I thought bulk is big, right? So I thought, oh, that must be when you make a bunch of dough all at once. No, bulk fermentation is when you take your starter, you add flour and water to it and mix it, and then you leave it to rest or proof. That's what's bulk fermentation is. The definition is the first long rise of the dough after all the ingredients have been mixed. Then you have all kinds of other process. The thing about sourdough bread is you have to wait. It's not like instant, right? And we live in a time and a place and a culture where everybody wants everything right away. It's like, you know what? I want to just buy some sourdough bread from the store, come home, put it in my toaster, toast it, and that's it. So when you do something that takes days, not just a half an hour or 10 minutes, but days, it's frustrating. And then trying to learn how to do it, I thought, man, there's got to be an easier way. So I kept learning about all of these things, like I explained to you about hydration, because when you look at these formulas that these dough makers or bread makers and people talk about and use, they'll say, oh, for beginners and amateurs, you should probably use a 65% hydration. Well, I'm using 100% hydration. And I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? A hydration, all that means is that's a ratio of water to flour in the dough or the starter. Now, they always tell you it's going to be 100% flour. Why? Because flour, obviously, is the star of the bread. You need the flour to make the bread. But how do you do it all because after you do everything, you have to wait. Some people tell you to wait 45 minutes. Some people say 30 minutes. Some people say an hour. Some people take the dough, they mix it in with the starter and the water and the flour and the starter, and they make the dough. And I'm thinking, man, what am I missing? It's extremely frustrating. So I googled some of the terms that I've learned so that I can actually repeat them to you guys, because this is how crazy it is. You have gluten, right? Gluten is the protein structure, and this flour, this bread flour, has more protein than regular flour or natural flour, all-purpose flour. For example, if I use, I believe it's gold medal all-purpose flour, but this is bread flour, so it's got more protein in it, right? And supposedly, more protein gives the dough its elasticity and strength when you knead it and fold it. For example, when I make flour tortillas, I know how to make them because I've been making them for a while and I have a recipe. And it is not this hard. I can make 2 to 3 dozen tortillas in an hour, maybe an hour and a half, because I do let it rest for half an hour also. So there is a resting period. And they say that the longer you let it rest, the better they'll get. But you also have to keep your dough moist. That's why when they have you make everything and your dough, your bread dough, your sourdough bread dough, you have to give it time to rise. Okay? So another thing I learned when I first started making the bread, my sister goes, oh yeah, once you make your bread, you put it in a banneton. And I'm thinking, what the heck is a banneton? A banneton is a fancy bowl that you might pay up to $80 for online or go to a specialty store, when you can use a regular. Bear with me, guys. You can use a regular glass bowl like this. You can use whatever you have in your house, to be honest. So when I'm watching all these people in their kitchens, the majority of them are women, and there's some that are men. These guys got really nice kitchens. They got state-of-the-art ovens and stoves. They have every single piece of equipment you need to make bread. And I'm thinking, okay, what if I don't have those things? What am I supposed to do? For example, they have this thing right here, which is, I think it's called a Dutch or some kind of whisk. That's what they use when they put the starter in the bowl and water and they mix it. I'm like, can't you use a spoon or a fork or a spatula? You know.
Go take a bath!
I'm live right now, so they hear. I heard a lot of people say to use a spoon or this is like a kind of like a fork spatula. They tell you to use all kinds of things. And I saw someone tonight and a lot of the people just use a regular kitchen spatula, right? So I'm thinking, okay, I don't have, that's another tool or something that I don't have. Then they have a scraper, but then they have these other scrapers that are smaller in plastic. So when they mix it in the bowl, it makes it easier and it doesn't stick, because sourdough is going to be really sticky. Okay, so what I did is I've just been searching, trying to find the right recipe. And it hasn't worked. I found a guy online. His page is called Sourdough Made Easy. He has this thing where he can make the dough in under 10 minutes. And technically, it's made in under 10 minutes. But what he did say it, but he said it after, was that he let his dough rest overnight. Because most bread makers make their bread dough at night and they let it rest. And the term for rest is called proof, right? Proofing, which is the final rise of the dough after it has been shaped and before baking, sometimes called the second rise. And it's like, I haven't even got to the other parts before you proof it, because there's other stages in making the bread. It's crazy, right? I already told you about the bread lane. I told you about the oven spring. Then I told you about the crumb. Well, I didn't talk about the crumb. The crumb, which you would think is the outside, right? Like a crumb, the outside of a bread. I would call it the crumb or the crust. No, the crumb is after they make the bread, they cut it open, and they usually always cut it open in the same manner. They split it in half, then they open it up and fold it, and it looks all nice, and they show it. That's how people show their bread. It's like folding something in half, right? And then you see all the bubbles inside the bread. That's what's called the crumb. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So you have the banneton. I told you about the banneton. They say that that's a special basket used to support the dough during the final proofing to help it hold its shape. This dough, when you watch people make these dough online, on social media, it always comes out nice and round, like a ball, like a little, maybe the size of a small cantaloupe. They're beautifully round, the skin is nice and smooth and tight, and you're like, how do they get it like that? So when they go through the stages of making the bread, everything looks good. And that is called the shaping process. And listen to what shaping, they say shaping is the process of forming the dough into a desired shape, such as a round. I call it a ball, but obviously it's not a ball because it's flat on the bottom because you have it on a flat surface. It cannot be fully round. If it were, it would roll. And get this, they don't call it a ball. They call it a boule, like boule, B-O-U-L-E, another French word, I guess, or an oval, which is called a batard. And if you've seen some of these fancy baskets, they have them there. They're round like this, similar to this bowl, but they're made out of rattan, like you would see in a wicker chair, right? And then they have a cotton, some sort of linen or cotton inside lining it, and they're expensive. They're not cheap. You can probably find them online really cheap. Then you gotta wait for them, right? So I don't have any of these tools, but I kept learning about all of these things. For example, when I got my first starter, when you leave it and it ferments, whether you leave it on the counter, like this is one that I actually fed tonight. You're supposed to feed them. That's another thing. Your starters, you don't just leave them, you feed them. And you look inside there, right? Supposedly it's alive. So you see all those bubbles. You let it rise. When they tell you to let it rise, it's supposed to double in size. So what you do when you make it, right? This is one that I've had for a while. I stirred up and I guess resurrected, brought back to life. But you add flour and water, right? Which is called feeding it, and then it rises. They tell you they want it to double in size, so it's got to get pretty big. But then they tell you after it rises, it falls, and they call that a false rise. I'm like, when you call it a fall, it rise and fall. Another term, okay? So I found another person online, and I thought, hey, I've been told that no matter how much starter you have, you can make a new one. This is sourdough bread, Carmela. I've been trying to make it for going on 3 or 4 months, and I failed. So the title of my little live stream is my sourdough journey. I've gone through 3 bags of King Arthur bread flour, and I'm at a loss. I really want to quit, but I've been encouraged by my wife and my friend to keep trying, and so that's what I'm doing. So I just stumbled upon another person. I told you guys I found Sourdough Made Easy, and I tried his formula, and apparently I think it was my starter that wasn't good, so it failed. Thank you, I appreciate that. So my wife's advice, which I take very seriously, she's pretty smart for the most part, I decided to make my own, and I had a starter. So what I'm going to do to the starter tonight is I'm going to feed it, because this is a good starter. And all you do is you give it the same amount. I have somebody bothering me right now, like distracting me, so I'm trying to stay focused.
I'm trying to be your live audience.
I don't like. I have a hard time like multitasking and thinking. I'm not that kind of guy. You can see how I'm talking. I can't even talk right anymore, right? Not that I get nervous. I don't mind being in front of the camera. Okay, so what I'm gonna do first at this other person's request is I'm gonna add some water to the starter. And a starter is how you make your sourdough bread, right? That's what a starter is. A starter is a live, bubbly mixture of flour and water. That's all it is. That contains wild yeast and bacteria for leavening or making it rise, right? And here's my starter. I fed it. That's another thing. They tell you to feed it, let it rest, feed it. Then when you feed it, before you feed it the next time, you throw some away, which is called discard. So it's a lot to take in. So right now I'm going to make my own starter, and I have a good starter, right? Which is 9 years old, and my sister gave me. So I'm going to add water to it. And that's another thing. They tell you when you add the water, you don't want it too hot, because what does heat do? Heat kills bacteria. So if your water is over like 90 degrees, over 100 degrees, they say that it'll ruin your starter. So that's another tool that all of these fancy schmancy bread makers have. They have thermometers, fancy thermometers, regular thermometers. So this water, I'm going to add to this starter. I explained that a ratio is 1:1:1. You feed it flour and water. That's it. That's all you do, Carmela. So I'm going to heat this up very lightly. For about 11 seconds so it doesn't get too hot. Similar to guys who have to learn the hard way when their wives tell them, heat up the baby's bottle, make sure it's not too hot, and you put a little bit of milk on your wrist to make sure it doesn't burn. That way it doesn't burn the baby when the baby drinks milk, right? Or burn the baby's throat. Be too hot for them. So all I'm going to do right now is add this water into the jar. Then I'm going to stir it up. Because what that does, when you stir it up, it makes sure everything is mixed in with it, all right? Mixes everything together. Supposedly, that's another thing. I don't know. I'm just taking someone else's word for it and trying to make it myself. But supposedly, when you get this starter, you dissolve it and mix it. That means it's going to get really incorporated very well into the flour, because that's what I'm putting in next. Then, as I said earlier in the video, what do you have to do? You have to wait. Everything's wait. It's a waiting game. You have to constantly wait. It's like nothing is fast when it comes to this process, and it's very, very frustrating, right? So I'm gonna mix this up. Looks like I got a little hardening on the bottom, but that's okay, because as you mix it, you're good to go. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to mix it up and then feed it. Now this is all I'm doing. I'm not making the bread tonight because I don't have a magic wand to make the time go by and have this ferment, or bulk ferment, as they say is the term. And I was saying earlier, explaining how when my sister has been helping me make the bread, and when I discussed the bread making process with her, she says, I don't like talking about those terms, and just do what I say. But I'm like, I'm learning the terms, I want to be a good student. Yes, master, right? So anyways, mix this old starter. It had some little parts in it that were kind of hard because it's been resting in the refrigerator for, I don't know, maybe a week or so. And that's another thing. They tell you if your starter is cold, all that does when you put it in the cold is it slows down the fermentation. Basically, it doesn't necessarily freeze it, but it really slows it down. Makes it hard to grow. Okay, so I have all of this mixed in here now. Pretty good. I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you look inside there? So this looks like old milk. It takes a long time, Carmela. It takes a long time to be ready. You basically, once you mix this, like right now I got the starter and I have the water. Now I'm going to add the flour. Check it out. You're gonna add the flour in there, right? Because you got to mix it all in. And it's an even amount of flour and water. And I'm in this recipe that I'm making right now that I'm using 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. And the water is kind of warm. It's not hot, but it's not cold. They tell you when you start making bread and researching it and looking into it that everything matters. So the temperature in your house matters, the water temperature matters, and you're like, gosh, that's another thing I have to consider when I'm gonna make bread. And I haven't even got to the baking stage. And this one that I'm doing right now, I won't be able to bake it for at least, I don't know, maybe a day or so, because I want to keep the starter. And if I want to keep the starter in here, that means I have to feed it regularly, right? Like those kids we have. You got to feed them all the time. They always want to eat, right? But anyways, you feed it regularly for a sourdough starter. But once you feed it, you have to wait, right? So that's the hard part, I don't want to wait. And then depending on the time of day, you make your starter. For like right now, it's 10:27 here in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. So if I have to wait 3 or 4 hours, that means it's going to be late at night or early in the morning, like 2:30 or 4 in the morning. And I don't think I'll be up by then. I'll probably be sleeping, So this is what my starter looks like. I'm going to show you guys. It's going to be real thick and heavy if you're like mixing it. I'm not mixing it with my hand because I have it in a jar. I don't have a little tiny hand, like the guy from Scary Movie. I don't know what number that was, but it was the one with the Wayans brothers in it. They had a guy with a little hand. This is just, I'm talking about a character, not, people in general. But, so anyways, there's another thing. When you make your starter, excuse me, and you have it in a jar, they tell you after you make it to push everything down. Right, so I'm getting the spatula. I'm going to turn this camera. Sounds like you're really working hard. I bet your food is... I don't know. Thank you so much, Aisha. But I don't think my bread... My wife and daughter like the bread, and I'm happy they do, but I'm very disappointed. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I'm making. It's a sourdough starter. Okay, the starter is what you need to make your bread. And then when you make your bread, you have to put a certain amount of flour and water and then salt in your bread. Then you have to wait to let it rise. And because this doesn't have instant yeast, like the fast-acting yeast, because I've made bread before. I've made some, gosh, what were those called, honey? The brioche. I made brioche buns, and then I made some baguettes, and they were so good with, flour, water, salt, but it had yeast. And the thing about yeast, if you guys know anything about it, yeast rises, right? So when you have yeast, you put it in a bowl, then you feed it. Same thing, they tell you to feed it, right? You give it some sugar and water, and then it starts bubbling. It bubbles. That's when you put it in the rest of the mix, and it eats up whatever you put in it. So here we have the starter. I'll show you guys right now. You try and get everything in there. Once it's in, then you cover it and you mark it and let it rest. But you gotta wait hours, right? The only way to speed it up would be I've heard some people put honey in it, but that's not the case. So now what you do, after you mix everything, I like to sort of try to flatten it, and then I want to use a big board because it's pretty big and bulky, but I'll use a coaster to flatten it out. All right, that's it. That's all you do. Now I made a starter. Now they tell you to wait. When you make your starter from scratch, which fortunately I didn't because I had some leftover starter, a tiny bit, which is all you need. Then you cover it. All right. Cover it loosely. So you just basically put the lid on. But I do want to try to scrape some more stuff down the side if I can. They tell you to scrape it, but they say to push it. And you are. Technically, you're pushing this spatula down the side to get everything in. But I wouldn't describe it as a push. I'd just say scrape it down because you're scraping it, right? You're not pushing it. I think I'm pushing. So anyways, got that. And you put a lid on it and don't close the lid tightly. Just put it on. And then you let it rest. But another thing you do is take a rubber band. Take a rubber band. Mark it. You guys see that? Mark it where it's at. You mark it. Then you leave it. That's it. That's all you do. You leave it and you let it rise. Now I brought another starter that I have. You see the rubber band, the mark, right? I fed it earlier. Here's what happens when you feed it. Because the thing about sourdough bread is that it's alive. So if you look inside there, you can see all those bubbles, right? And when it does this and you leave it and let it, it's resting and it's rising, that's a term I said earlier that they call bulk fermentation. So they tell you that you want your starter to rise at least double in size. So if you see right there, it's got to come up to here. And then sometimes you'll see videos of people's sourdough bread where it went all the way over and popped the lid open. But this is the one that I'm actually going to use. And because I put 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water and it already had starter in it, I have a big starter now. And a lot of times when you make starter, you might only use 100 grams or 50 grams. For example, one of the recipes I picked up tonight and I want to try, this is the funny thing. She says in her video that you only have to use 50 grams or 100 grams. And I'm like, that's a big difference because baking really is more of an exact science and it doesn't, it's not very forgiving. If you get it wrong, like you listen to bakers and they make a cake, especially ones that rise, and they'll say, oh, don't open the oven because the cake's going to flatten out. But yeah, that's what it is. So thank you guys for watching. How long does it take to be ready? I don't know. They tell you depending upon the temperature, it can be 3 or 4 hours. But that's just the beginning because once you have the starter ready, then you got to do the same thing all over. Now you're going to mix it in some dough and water and also salt because the starter is what helps everything get going. It's active, it's alive, right? That's it. Yeah, that would be great. And what I'm cooking is sourdough bread. All right, so that's it. Thanks for watching, you guys. Have a great night, and I really hope this bread comes out good. And it actually works because it hasn't so far. And I wanted to encourage myself and encourage others to keep trying to do the things we want to do, especially if they're good things, and go from there. So have a nice night, guys. Thanks for watching. Take care.